I first came across the sayings of the Desert Fathers, I think, when I was a student. And a little bit later, when I was a graduate student, I became very friendly with Sister Benedicta Ward, who was, of course, the first English translator of the complete alphabetical series of the Apothegmata Patrum. And I think in conversation with her over a couple of years, I became very, very engaged with this literature, because it's concise, it's very simple, very direct. Each story leaves you with a challenge, not an idea. You don't just think, oh, that's interesting. You think, perhaps I should do something. And I think running through it all, a sense of the diversity of the ways God deals with human beings and the need for absolute realism and humility. First message, I think, is we are called to recover our full humanity by God, and that the recovery of that full humanity means a consistent honesty about our failings and about our dependence on God and one another. In order to do away with all the fictions and the myths that we have about ourselves, we need a very rigorous process of silence, contemplation, and exposing ourselves to the challenge of a spiritual father. I think that's the heart of it. Yes, well, first of all, my first introduction to Orthodoxy was through Metropolitan Kallistos, whose book I read when I was about 14.
The Orthodox Church, I suppose.
The Orthodox Church. And that made a lifelong impact. I suddenly saw the connection of Christian doctrine and worship and prayer in a completely new way, and realized that things that I had been thinking about separately belonged together, and that this was the integration of theology and prayer, liturgy, witness. It's a great book, I think, and it does, it excites one about the Christian faith, not just Orthodoxy. So that's part of how it all began. Certainly in my teenage years, it was very much connected with a fascination with Russia, with Russian literature, culture, icons, music even, and film too. But when I was a student, and in my graduate student years, I began to read more about the Greek background. I, of course, encountered the work of Yanaras at this point as a graduate student, and wrote what I think was the first article in English on his work in 1972.
And was that the freedom of morality, or the person,
no, it was
the person and eros?
It's part of the Person and Eros, the first part of it to be published in Greek. So I worked at modern Greek a little bit so that I could read him, and read quite a lot of his work in the next few years. So he opened up that side of the Orthodox world to me. And later on, of course, Metropolitan John Zizioulas, whom I count as a friend, also had an impact. I also met Father Romanidis when I was in my 20s, I think. And although his was a bewilderingly individual interpretation of some aspects of history and so on, it was fascinating. It provoked me. I remember also reading some of Philip Sherard's work, so that there is a Greek strand in this story as well. Well, it was simply a great personal privilege to be with him as someone I've loved and revered for 40 years or more now, 50 years. So that was a great privilege in itself, and a great privilege to be received so warmly in the communities we visited. Just to share the liturgical life, to be able to share an all-night vigil, to have some conversation informally with both senior and junior members of the communities. And I think particularly the all-night vigil at Siamnopatra,
Okay.
was, yes, an entry into the depth of liturgical worship, which felt very new, very deep and important. I think I'd like to say perhaps 2 or 3 things on the basis of the book. One is that we are as much as ever surrounded by the forces of untruth, by influences which give us a false and narrow picture of our humanity. The greatest need of our world is to recover a sense of the depth and the richness of humanity in the image of God. But that means, of course, not only the joy and celebration that goes with that, but the honesty and the hard work on one's own capacity for untruth. And I think the Desert Fathers really help us with that. Second thing, and this is always a slightly hard thing to say, I hope that my friends in Greece, my friends in the Orthodox Church, can recognize that we who belong to another tradition still do genuinely share that spiritual legacy, and that as we try to grow together in better understanding, and perhaps in reconciliation one day, it will be because we have that common root in the vision of the early fathers, theological and spiritual. And for all that the Anglican Church has had a very uneven career in recent years with many conflicts and problems, we have always regarded ourselves as deeply in debt to the first 5 centuries of the Church and to that common legacy. So that's a second thing. And perhaps one last comment there. It's something which I learned from Christos Makropoulos particularly. It's very important that we think of our Christian faith as absolutely bound up with the experience of a praying community and a Eucharistic community. Christianity is not a system, it's not a religion. First of all, it's a church. It's a body inspired by the Spirit, connected together in koinonia, and discovering that more and more profoundly in liturgy and in prayer. And when we understand better that we're not simply talking about a system, then maybe we understand what we have to do in witness and in faithfulness.